So welcome back to part 2 of this series where I'm doing a slightly more in-depth look at my current bookbinding project. And in part 1 we did the actual pages of the book. I'm doing a lined book and I showed using my own template for the pages and also cutting the covers to the correct size, because I'm going to be adding some tabs as well, and I wanted the covers to be the right size to protect the tabs. So if you've not already seen part 1, I will link that below. And then in this part of the video we'll be making the spine with a curve and also these raised ridges to sort of mimic the traditional binding style. So it's kind of gonna be sort of something like this. So we'll look at how to get the curve on the spine and how to get the right measurement so that it fits the spine of your book. There was a little hiccup with that, which you will see right at the end if you stick around. And then also just simply adding these ridges. And then of course in the next video we'll be putting it all together and hopefully ending up with a pretty finished bound book. But for today we're just looking at the spine. So I have to think a little bit more carefully about the width of the spine, because although I've said I want it 3 centimetres, there is a little bit of flex in this depending on how tight I do the fabric support. I can kind of pull it in a little bit, or I can leave it a little bit looser. But the other thing I need to think about is, although this distance is 3 centimetres, or where I kind of want to do it is 3 centimetres, if I'm going to have a curved spine, the spine needs to be more than 3, so that to allow for the curve, the two ends of the curve are 3. Does that make any sense? Let me tell you a little story. Some years ago I did a course at my local college in welding, and part of the course included the theory of, you know, not just welding but other metal fabrication things. So there was a section about pipe bending. And I understand the concept that when you bend a pipe, the inside of the curve kind of gets compressed because you're kind of folding it almost, which means the outside of the curve stretches. And there was a particular calculation where you could work out the exact length to cut a piece of pipe so that after you bent it, it was still the exact size you needed. And I never got my head around that. When I sat the exam for the theory part of that course, it was a multiple choice, I think, with the majority of it. And most of it I did pretty well, but those questions that related to the bending and working out the maths of it, those ones I purely just guessed. So what am I going to do today about working out the size for this curve? There's probably a really simple way to do it, but I'm not that experienced with doing curved spines, so we'll kind of play it by ear and I'll tell you what my intentions are, and then we'll see if it works out. If it's really bad, I'll cut this whole section out and then try a different way. So I've got this can of dry shampoo, which I'm planning to use to create my curve. And for the spine material, I thought I'd just use this. It's kind of like a really cheap card, which was like the back cover of a notebook. And the plan is to wet the card and then wrap it around the can while it's wet, tie it down and then leave it to dry, so that then once it's dry it's reshaped with this curve. But how long, I mean how wide do I cut the piece of card? I could just cut it big and then just trim it to size afterwards, but I want to try and work it out. So if I want the two ends of the curve to be 3 centimeters, so I'm thinking if I got a Sharpie, if I kind of mark just by that line there, and from that point I want 3 centimeters, which is here. So it's not a huge curve. Let me just double check that. Hopefully this is in focus. Yeah, so from between the two marks is 3 centimeters. So now if I get a flexible tape measure and measure the outside of that, it's 4 centimeters. So that's what I'm gonna go with. We're gonna cut a strip which is 4 centimeters wide, and then it's 21.5 centimeters tall. I'm actually going to cut 2, and my idea is that because this card it's not particularly sturdy, I want to curve 2 pieces and then after they're curved glue them together, and my thinking is that that would make the curve stronger, less likely to open back out. I don't know if that's accurate or not. That's just how my logic is working at the moment. Obviously if you've done curved spines yourself and you know better, please feel free to let me know in the comments, but this is what I'm going to try for today. Okay, so I've got my 2 pieces of spine cut. So then what I'm going to do is just take some water and just brush the card with water. Now the theory of this is that it relaxes the fibres and allows you to reshape. We'll soon find out how well that works. Do I need to do both sides? I might as well. I've no idea. I probably should have watched a few more videos of people doing curved spines. I watched a couple, but there's like a couple of different ways. But we'll see how this goes. Okay, so that the water is all soaked in, and now we want to, oh actually, because the height of this is going to go across the join for the lid, I'm actually going to wrap some tape around the join to hopefully minimise any kind of bump that happens at that point. I don't know how much difference that will actually make, but hopefully it might help. Okay, and then we want to make sure that it's straight and not at an angle. Obviously that's an extreme, but I just thought because there's this seam on the can, that seems like a good place to curve. And then obviously we've got the other one as well. Now one of the videos that I watched with somebody doing this, they wrapped loads of elastic bands around, and I just worry that that would put dents in the card. So I'm thinking I'm actually going to wrap with this sort of, well, it's not exactly a ribbon, but kind of cloth. Maybe if I just try another bit of tape just from the, is that going to be enough? I wonder. Okay, well, we'll see. We'll leave that to dry and then see what happens, and then we'll see if we carry on from here or if we delete this bit and try something different. Right, I'll be back later. Okay, so we're back. It's completely dry now. Those eagle-eyed of you might notice that it's wrapped differently than it was a second ago. But that's because I came back to unwrap it and it wasn't completely dry, so I rewrapped it slightly differently. Okay, but it is now completely dry. So we've got two slightly curved spines. This one looks a little bit off. Okay, but let's glue these two together to give them a little bit more strength. And I've got 3-in-1 beacon glue, which is basically the same as Fabri-Tac. I will just say, look how small this is. I thought I was getting a really good deal when I bought these, but I obviously wasn't paying attention to the size of the bottle. Okay. Now we want to think about where we want to put the ridges. Oh dear, that I don't think I had that very straight. Hopefully it will hold itself in line once it's all together. I hoped that that would sit flat on the table, but right, okay. So in the traditional binding, where you see the lines of stitching here, that would actually be kind of the reason for the ridges on the outside. It was kind of part of the binding, but obviously in this particular way of binding, the ridges would just be decorative. But I thought it would be nice to actually match them to where the lines of stitches are, to kind of mimic as close as possible the traditional way. So I'm just gonna hold that so that it's sort of centered. Just put a little, and then again this way. Now I haven't actually got any really thick string or twine that I can use to do a chunky ridge, so I'm actually just going to use normal twine and then just do kind of 2 or 3 lengths. So my plan is I will do 2 side by side and then maybe 1 on top, so that it gives it a little bit of a curve. That's the idea anyway. So I'm just going to cut some lengths of this. Take 2 to start with. I'll just hold that for a few seconds just to give it a chance to hold before I move on to the next one. Obviously it's not going to be completely dry, but just to give it a chance to grab. Being a little bit more careful with the gluing on this one. Just try and get that third one to sit sort of in the ridge between the first two. And I am now very gluey and I'm sticking to it more than the string. If you don't like glue on your fingers, you might want to wear gloves when you're doing this, or you might just want to be a little bit more careful with than I am. Okay, so now I'm going to let that dry completely before I trim off these extra loose ends, and I'm going to go and clean myself up. Okay, so now that these cords are dry, we just need to trim off the ends, and I've got out actually my fabric scissors because they're sharper. Just want to be able to get a nice clean cut, and I'm doing it sort of at an angle. I don't know where that went, that just pinged off. Rather than cutting them straight this way, so it's like a blunt edge, I'm cutting them at this sort of angle so it sort of tapers a little bit, so perhaps it won't be so apparent where the joins are. Wow, these little bits really are shooting off. I'll be finding these for weeks. Okay, and then I will actually just trim off any extra little bits that are poking. Oh, that one was really hard. Some of them, it's like where the glue's like really soaked into the string, the twine, whatever you want to call it. Kind of a little bit harder than others. Okay. Well, at least I didn't lose all of the offcuts, but yeah, they're around the room somewhere. Okay, so here we go. We've got our cover and our spine kind of ready to go. So now I need to make some decisions about the colours and what paper and fabric I'm going to use. Before I end this video, I've got a little confession to make. You remember all the fuss I made about how I was going to measure the curve of the spine, and I marked it on the bottle and on the can, and I measured it and was all very careful and precise? Well, the truth is I got it wrong. So I wanted this final measurement to be 3 centimeters across, but it's actually ended up as 3.5. And I was thinking, how has that happened? Because I was so careful with measuring it, and you know what they say, a bad workman blames his tools. So I'm going to blame my tape measure, because some of you might have already realised this when I was doing it, but the markings on this tape measure don't really make sense. So here there's the little line right next to the 4, which was, you know, where I measured on the can. It had to be 4 centimeters around, and I did think at the time it was a little bit odd that the whole number was kind of next to the little line that would normally be a half, but it's very definitely next to that line, isn't it? But that, for what I thought was the 4 centimetre mark, is actually 3.5. So I should have cut the width of my cardboard at 3.5 centimetres to get it to curve to be 3, but because I actually cut it at 4, that's why my spine has ended up being 3.5. But I think we're okay. I don't think I need to do it again because, as I said, there is some flexibility here. So when I add the cloth reinforcement, as long as I don't squish this up, as long as I keep it at its full width, I think we'll be okay. And when I stitched this, I didn't stitch it as tight as I normally would, because although I'm predominantly going to be writing in this book, I know there are going to be things that are getting glued in as well. So of course, the more things that get glued in, you know, obviously the book kind of widens out at this end. So if it's a little bit looser to start with at the bound end, I think we'll be okay. But we'll find out for sure in the third part of the video. So thanks for watching. I hope that was interesting with the spine production, and I hope you're tempted to give it a go, and especially now you know what mistakes to look out for. Just double check your tape measure markings. So I'll just put a link up here for part 1 if you've not seen that and you want to go back to look at it. And for now I'm going to put this other one as one that YouTube thinks that you might want to watch. But once I've added the third part, then I'll change that link so that you can move straight on to part 3 and hopefully see a book that's not in pieces, that's finished and pretty to look at. So thanks for joining me again, and I shall see you soon.